Welcome back. I am once again going to be using Tier Maker here to discuss Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector thoughts. Today's video is going to be a faction versus faction, and I'm going to try to rank them into different categories. Just for your information, I would not say any of these are hard, fast rules, but I frequently get people asking for my opinion on what faction would I use against other factions and which ones aren't very good. So hopefully this will help clarify some of my thoughts if you're a newer player or just curious what my beliefs on this section are. Now again, not a hard, fast rule, and probably the more important thing is depending on what map you're playing, because certain maps will definitely mitigate and completely disregard these thoughts here, because those certain maps definitely have major faction advantages compared to others. But on a whole and generalizable, these are kind of my thoughts here. But first, if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. So going first, so what I'll say is, let's say we're playing against an Adeptus Sororitas faction here. If that were the case, I think in terms of a counter, they really struggle against Necrons. And the reason for that being is a lot of the Necrons have pretty decent armor, and then with their resurrection ability, it allows you to really interfere with the sisters, and you can really lock them down and make them waste a lot of shots. Likewise, you can summon Scarab Swarms, and once you take out the Seraphim, the sisters have somewhat limited mobility and can be hard for them to cover the whole map, and then it allows you with your Necrons to be able to snipe a lot of the Adeptus Sororitas leaders, which will mitigate their buffs. And if you take out their commanders, you can make it so they can never use their command points, and they really rely on using that to really their tier 2, tier 3 abilities to allow them to swing things in their favor. And also, because so many of your units will have high armor piercing and good range, it's possible that you may snipe Rhino transports before they can close the distance, and that can all work to your advantage here. In terms of factions that I think probably have some advantages against the Adeptus Sororitas, I would say the Blood Angels can definitely be slightly advantaged against the Blood Angels, but again, it depends on the player, because as you've seen by a lot of my matchups, I've won many matches using Adeptus Sororitas against the Blood Angels, but it is a harder matchup because so many of the Space Marine units have pretty decent armor that you have to chop through, and if they can blow up your transports before you get into combat, that can be a disaster. And then with all their jump infantry, again, they can snipe your HQ units pretty easily, and that will really hamper your abilities. And most of the Blood Angel units are going to be good at damaging the Adeptus Sororitas units, so in that way they slightly have an advantage there. And the Blood Angels just have a lot more mobility. Perhaps another faction that could be quite good against the Adeptus Sororitas would be the Orcs post-patch update. And the reason for this is, they have the grenades, which are pretty decent against the Adeptus Sororitas because a lot of them don't have a lot of armor. The Orcs themselves are quite good at being bullet sponges. The beamy def guns are now incredibly good against vehicles, allowing them to destroy the immolators and rhinos, even with the evasion bonuses that they'll get because they just have the sheer amount of shots. The Ludas with their regular guns are pretty good at doing significant damage if you bring the def dreads out. With their machine guns, they can definitely do really good range damage with the sheer amount of shots as well, or you can just turn them into scorches, and that will be able to kill most of the Adeptus Sororitas units. Now, if they do Seraphim builds with the multi-melta, like the pistols or whatever they're called, no, Inferno guns are what they're called, that can definitely really hurt the Orcs. You can mitigate some of that with a couple of burner boys to be able to soak up a lot of damage, and then if you bring out your big mechs for the custom force field, you can really do a lot of really good work there. So I think the Orcs are definitely slightly advantaged, if not a toss-up matchup. It really just depends on what kind of build your opponent does. In the past, you could, I would say in the creep patch, it would be even more advantage because the knobs with their power claws had splash damage, whereas now they don't. So that kind of affects your ability to get a lot of kills in melee. So in that way, it actually kind of drops the orcs a little bit in terms of their effectiveness, but again, with the sheer amount of shots that you can get using their tier 1 ability, it'll generally allow you to do quite well, and then you can run around with your storm boys to try to lock down different vehicles and do quite a bit of damage. So I'm gonna keep them orcs at slightly advantaged here, but I think you can make a strong argument that it's kind of a toss-up. In terms of other toss-ups here, I think the Tyranids fall into this category. Certainly using swarm tactics, you can outshoot a lot of the Adeptus Sororitas, and then with the Synapse, you can mitigate the evasion bonuses that they get, so you can still land really good attacks at range. And then if you throw in the Venom Thropes to soak up the Overwatch, and then throw down some gargoyles to get some evasion to increase your accuracy even further, they can definitely do some work, but for the most part, if you're playing against the Adeptus Sororitas, they're likely going to have some sort of flamer build against you, so that's going to be a major nightmare using a swarm tactics, and then with their Seraphim getting the Infernal Pistols backed up by Hospiters, they're going to be sniping a lot of your important Synapse creatures, and then with the armor, bringing an bringing an Immolator or two against the Tyranids can be a real disaster, especially if you're able to protect the flank from getting attacked, because then you're going to just be destroying most of their units and sniping down the units that can take out the vehicles. So I would say it's a toss-up, if not an uphill battle with the Tyranids. Faction, actually I'd probably say it's maybe a slightly uphill battle. If you're going into it, then you can build around it, but if they know you're going to be playing as Tyranids, then they can definitely build a faction army against you. So I guess I'd actually say Tyranids are probably a uphill battle against the Adeptus Sororitas. And then I talked myself out of it as I was describing my reasoning. And then I would say the Tau is probably a toss-up against the Adeptus Sororitas. In the past, I would say these guys were definitely advantaged, but post-ethereal changes, it makes their infantry much more endangered to ranged fire. They don't have all that evasion, and you can just sit there and potentially outshoot them with your Sisters of Battle, and you can just throw a bunch of grenades onto their units, and then you can use the blessed ammo to knock down the more heavily armored units, and you can keep your units spaced out so the commander doesn't flame everybody. And if you're lucky enough to not get flanked with your stealth suits and things, it can definitely be in pretty equal battle. So it really depends on your positioning and if you can snipe down the high value targets here. But the Tau can definitely have a little bit of trouble against the Adeptus Sororitas even pre patch, but I think afterwards it's definitely a toss-up now. And then in terms of the Chaos, I would say that's also an uphill battle. Because the Chaos doesn't have a lot of armor, and I wouldn't say a lot of their units have enough HP that they're totally hard to kill with the Adeptus Sororitas, because that's the advantage that the Orcs have, is they're just such big bullet sponges. It allows them to soak up a bunch of damage. Whereas the Chaos Demons, you're going to try to overwhelm them with numbers, and almost every player is going to be sitting there with units that are going to be good at doing damage against single unit entities, and so the Adeptus Sororitas will easily be able to snipe out your Bloodthirsters. They'll get bonus damage. The Canonists can almost solo a Chaos Bloodthirster, assuming you're going to miss the attack, because while you miss the attacks with your Bloodthirster, flying them into combat to fight the Canonist, and the more damage you do to her, the higher her evasion is. And then when the Bloodthirster does its counterattacks against the Canonist, it does that stupid little kick that does like 30 to 60 damage, whereas the Canonist will attack with her regular weapon, doing significant amounts of damage, and she'll do that effectively to any of the HQ units that you're using. and it just allows the Adeptus Sororitas to really snipe down all your units, to stop you from continually summoning. And then again, they're going to bring some flamers because they know you're going to have a lot of infantry, and the flamers will be able to take out the bloodletters, the chaos hounds. They'll struggle a little bit against the skull cannons, which will be something that would be highly effective for your units playing against the Adeptus Sororitas, but for the most part they'll just outmaneuver you, ignore the cannons, and allow them to get the kill. And then if they have vehicles that have focus on armor, then your skull cannons just are going to be completely ineffective, and they'll just overwhelm you. So I would say that that's kind of how I would think about for ranking units, assuming we're playing against the Adeptus Sororitas. I don't know if there's any faction that you really don't want to bring. I personally don't like playing Adeptus Sororitas versus the Chaos because I think it's a very hard match, but saying that, it's definitely doable. But this is if I was going to be doing a tournament or something and I was focusing purely on wanting to win, this is kind of how I would think things through in terms of my rankings, trying to bring a faction with the highest chances of winning. So hopefully that helps you think your way through the Adeptus Sororitas. And then kind of going through here again, this is going to be difficult. Okay, so for the next faction here, let's pretend that we are going to be fighting the Blood Angels here. So in terms of the Blood Angels, if I had to say somebody was going to be countering the Blood Angels, pre-patch it would be the Tau. Post-patch with the Ethereal nerf, I still think the Tau are very effective against the Blood Angels because you can sit there and snipe them at range with the crisis suits, and then your commander with the flamer can do substantial amounts of damage. Your stealth suits are going to allow you to snipe out all their high value targets. You'll have pretty good mobility against them. You'll be able to use your fire warriors and pathfinders to snipe out their vehicles if they're bringing it, in addition to their commander units. The Riptides are good. I just think it's a very hard battle. Now, post-patch, with the infantry units not being able to be buffed continually with the evasion and HP, that will nerf the breacher squads a little bit. But again, if you're using jump infantry, which 80 to 90% of the players online are going to be doing with a Space Marine build, you're going to have to jump your guys into the breacher wall, and the breacher wall within 1 to 2 Overwatch shots will be able to take out squads of your jump infantry, which is just an absolute nightmare. So I think the Tau still probably counter the Blood Angels, but not nearly as bad as they used to. The Necrons, I think, are slightly advantaged against the Blood Angels. The reason for that is the Resurrection ability definitely allows you to increase your staying power against the Blood Angels, and if you're able to build an army against them, you can really snipe their heroes and then use Living Lightning against them. You can then use Scarab Swarms to kill enemy heroes that may be isolated and have their back exposed, doing substantial amounts of damage. But it's really a lot of RNG. You know, if they're able to jump around the back of your units, you go with like a heavy Living Lightning build and they do Terminators, especially if they have the Thunder Hammers, and you're not going to do a lot of damage. So again, I think the Necrons have a slight advantage against the Blood Angels, but ironically the Blood Angels are actually pretty good depending on certain builds against the Necrons. So it just comes down to who has a better understanding. But again, considering this is like a tier list, again, multiplayer against the average player, I think against the average player, the Necrons will slightly have an advantage on the Blood Angels here. In terms of the Chaos Demons, I tend to try to never bring Chaos Demons against the Blood Angels, because the Blood Angels with their heavy plasma incinerators can snipe out your Bloodthirster, your Chaos Demons, your soul grinders, really take out the blood masters. Pretty much everybody that can summon can be sniped out that way. Your hero units also give significant momentums to the blood angels, so they can run in there after they've been given increased momentum from the lieutenants, and then they're buffed with the chalice and the increased damage from the sanguinary priest, and then they jump you with the sanguinary guard, and they'll kill an HQ unit, and then between those two things he already gets an extra attack because he'll then be able to surge, and then if he ends up getting an extra attack already because of their increased momentum, and then with their ability where they have a percentage chance to get extra AP depending on the amount of models they kill, can just create this chain killing situation where they take out the high value targets, and then the blood angels will run in there and with their heavy flamers and take out a lot of your bloodletters or flesh hounds, things like that, and just totally annihilate your force. So unless you're able to guarantee that you're getting good attacks and not going to get heavily countered, I think the Chaos Demons have huge disadvantages against the Blood Angels. Regarding the Orcs, I think that's overall probably a toss-up when it comes to the Blood Angels. And the reason for that is the Blood Angels, again, are very good at having sniper units that can take out your Orc leaders. And your Orcs, again, don't have a lot of armor, so a lot of their units, such as the Predators and the Invictor Warsuit, or even a Dreadnought with the Flamer, all those things can do tons of damage against the Orcs. And then because most Orc players now are going to be bringing mostly ranged build, the jump infantry are going to definitely have advantages against you. So it's all about your positioning and how you're able to use the map for you. So perhaps the Orcs are a slight uphill battle compared to the Blood Angels, but if you're able to bring your beamy def guns and take out the vehicles and do some stuff, it could probably be a toss-up. So I really kind of am going back and forth on this. I still think it's probably a toss-up here. And then the next one is the Tyranids. Again, hard to know. Perhaps it's a slight uphill battle, but because most units or most players are going to use jump infantry, I'll put it up into a toss-up here instead of an uphill battle. And the reason for that is swarm tactics are generally pretty effective against the Blood Angels. You can stack up your momentum. Blood Angels typically will give quite a bit of momentum gains when you're getting model kills here, and then you're able to really take advantage of the synapses to stack up attacks, use your Tyranids to get the natural killer to trigger. But if you're not able to get those attacks, they snipe your synaptic creatures, it's definitely going to be an issue. But for the most part, you can typically just overwhelm the Blood Angels with a sheer amount of bodies that you can bring onto the force if you use swarm tactics. For that reason, I'll say it's a toss-up. It really depends on what build you bring against the opponent and your positioning. So I guess you could say that with really any faction, but for Tyranids, I think it's probably 50-50 about whether you're going to be able to win that or not. And then lastly is the Adeptus Sororitas. I actually think the Adeptus Sororitas can struggle against the Blood Angels, and again, it's for the same reasons we talked about already. The Blood Angels are typically pretty good at assassinating your HQ units because all their units have high AP melee attacks. They have a lot of movement with their jump packs, so that allows them to really snipe out and kill your HQ and your other buffing units. And then once those ones are taken out, it really allows you to then mop up the rest of the Adeptus Sororitas infantry and do a lot of really good damage against them. So in that aspect, it can be quite difficult to take them back out here. So I think that's how I would think about using the Adeptus Sororitas against the Blood Angels here. Okay, here we go. I can pull these back down. Let's see. Next, let's pretend that we're going up against a Tyranid faction here. So in terms of who can counter the Tyranids, I would say the Necrons tend to be a pretty hard counter for the Tyranids. The reason for that is Living Lightning is key. You bring out a couple of Immortals with Living Lightning, you know you're going to be fighting some Synaptic creatures, and they're going to be bringing swarms, and your Living Lightning is going to just absolutely devastate everything that's there. And then the rest of your units all are going to have enough AP to easily punch through all the Synaptic creatures to allow you to snipe them as well, which is therefore going to lower the effectiveness of the other units. And then you can also drop down, scarabs and lock down other units so everybody else can get into combat. You have enough units that can tank shots from range. That just allows you to be very, very powerful. So I think the Necrons are definitely a huge counter to the Tyranids. Other units that are advantaged against Tyranid play, I would say, would be the Orcs. You bring out a couple of Burna Boys to drop the Synaptic creatures. They have enough HP that they can soak up the Overwatch, making it a little harder for your opponent to then get their main advantages against you, to build up their momentum while you're killing them. And then with all of your shooting guys, you'll be able to snipe out again their Synaptic leaders and allow you to take advantage of the situation. So I think Orcs are definitely advantaged against the Tyranid players. Somebody else that's advantaged, I would say, is the Blood Angels, and that's because the Blood Angels have access to Flamer units as well, allowing you to easily snipe down a lot of the enemy forces pretty easily, and then also allowing you to snipe down their Synaptic creatures, which will therefore significantly mitigate the amount of damage that they're able to do to you. And then the crack grenades, if you're quite weakened and they don't wipe you out with your Assault Marines, you can just throw the crack grenade and take out, again, the Synaptic leaders to do a lot of damage. And you can lock guys into melee. And if you bring out your armor, assuming you focus down, Gene Stealers or Hormagaunts, the Tormagaunts themselves, even being buffed, are not going to be able to do significant amounts of damage to your vehicles. And then if you do have a couple of Flamers, you should easily be able to just completely mop up the Tyranid forces and just out-survive them and out-tank their abilities. You just got to be very, very careful if you're going to be jumping into units that have a bunch of swarm tactic advantages, because that's how they can really do some damage against the Blood Angels. But for the most part, I would say the Blood Angels have advantage to the Tyranid forces. Somebody else that's slightly, I would say, advantaged. Now, this may not be as much of an issue post-patch, because in the past what you do is you bring your Ethereals and they would just buff the HP and evasion, and that would significantly reduce the effectiveness of the Tyranid Synaptic guys, because you'd have to get through all that, and it would make it hard for you to outshoot the opponents, and they'd be able to snipe out your Synaptic creatures. Even post-patch, I still think that they're still likely advantaged against the Tyranids, so I think that's definitely a harder matchup. In terms of a toss-up, I would say the Adeptus Sororitas. Reason being is the big thing with them is the more momentum they get, the more evasion they get, therefore their survivability increases. But between Swarm Tactics, the Venom Thrope, and Synaptic creatures, you're really able to overwhelm a lot of that, and you can also lower the evasions, because the Adeptus Sororitas can be weak to the poison, and for those reasons, even if they have some Flamers, you just focus those guys down and you can typically assassinate their Flamer units before they can do too much damage to you. So it really comes down to who is a better player and who has better builds. But I could say Adeptus Sororitas could be a toss-up on that in my experience. There's definitely ways to get around it. Again, these are all controversial, not set in stone, but I'm just thinking for the average player, this is how I would think my way through it. And then for Chaos Demons, I would say it's probably a C or a D. D seems like it's probably inappropriate, so I'll say uphill battle. Again, the reason being is the Chaos Demons, they have no armor, and unlike the Orcs, they're not going to be able to tank those shots quite as well. They do have the Fleshhounds, which do have Flamer attacks, which therefore can take out Swarm Tactics, but in order to get into combat to take advantage of those, you're likely going to get blown apart. Now, the advantage you do have is if you have the Bloodthirsters, if you do your double War Shout ability, that can kill any low tier unit that's nearby. I think Gargoyles can potentially survive that if they have bad damage rolls, but for the most part, unless you're able to kill enough of them, the swarm tactics will completely overwhelm the chaos demons. And if you throw a gene stealer or two in there, being fully buffed with the swarm tactics, it'll allow them to just totally chop through all your heroes, take out your commander units, and even do significant damages to the skull cannons. Now the skull cannons can do substantial damage to you too, because they can do the charge attack, but their charge attack does not have enough splash damage to take out a lot of the swarmed units, and so a lot of those, even if they're injured, will still be alive, and then they can still buff up the damage to the uninjured units, allowing them to substantially damage your forces. So that can be a real nightmare when that occurs. And therefore, I would say it's an uphill battle when you're playing against the Tyranid forces. So next, let's pretend that we are playing as, let's say, the Necron, since I have it right here. So if I was playing against the Necrons, I don't think anybody is really a hard counter to the Necrons, because they're just a good overall faction. So I can't say there's one that's going to completely beat them and be a hard counter. I would say one faction that could be considered to be advantaged against the Necrons would be the Blood Angels, if you can get your positioning appropriate, because you could lock them into melee, mitigating a lot of the damage that they can do. And if you're able to snipe the enemy leaders like the Overlord and their other HQ units, you can really mitigate their ability to use the Scarab Swarms on you and back capture points, and likely significantly decrease the amount of buffs that they're getting on their Necron units, because even a Necron that resurrects with, one or two models, when you're playing as the Space Marines, even if they're shooting into you, it's not likely to do significant amount of damage to your units, because they have enough armor that they can tank it. And then, the Sanguinary Guard and the Plasma Pistol Interceptors and the Predator, for all those reasons, you can really do quite a bit of damage to the Necron units. So typically, if I'm trying to win, I would do a Blood Angel build. You just got to be very, very cautious with not getting your guys too close together, and then making sure you're using your land speeders with your heavy flamers to be able to do good damage. I typically don't bring the Dreadnoughts, because then you get into an area where if they have too many Gauss Blasters or Locust Heavy Destroyers, they can take out your vehicles too much. So you just got to be very cautious about that. But typically, if you're using things like the Librarian and their abilities, you can typically do enough damage to them that even if they're resurrecting, you're able to really mitigate the situation. So next, I would say Tyranids. I would say against the Necrons, I try to not bring Tyranids against Necrons, because I think the Necrons are a hard counter to the Tyranids. Again, the Living Lightning, all that stuff can be a real disaster, and I just would not want to have to deal with that. And then the Tyranids, or the Necrons, are also really good at sniping your synaptic creatures. So again, I would not recommend bringing Tyranids against a Necron player. Likewise, I actually think the Necrons can counter the Tau, so I personally try to not bring Tau against Necrons, because I think it's very easy to get overwhelmed with the Scarab Swarms with the Tau, and then you're typically able to outshoot the Necrons, and then they will overkill you, and if you get lucky with your RNG, you can actually do quite a bit against the Tau. So I think the Tau is probably a try not to bring, but I'll put it as an uphill battle. But personally, I try not to bring them, because especially against experienced players, they're going to really punish you quite heavily if you're doing Tau against Necrons. But maybe I'll make it an uphill battle instead. In terms of the Chaos Demons, I would say it's probably an uphill battle, if not a try not to bring situation. Again, the Necrons are going to be very good at sniping your heroes, and stopping you from summoning. And with the resurrection, it's going to be very hard for you to get enough kills on them. But if you are able to close the distance and lock them into melee, then you can that's how you'll typically win. And then you can use your flesh hounds to run around and outmaneuver the Necrons, but for the most part, I think it's probably a try not to bring, if not an uphill battle situation. The Necrons are definitely a highly effective force. In terms of the Adeptus Sororitas, I think they actually can do a pretty decent job against the Necrons. I'll say that as a toss-up. Because they have access to pretty cheap effective flamers. If you're able to get them into combat, that'll work out to your advantage. And if you're able to run in with your rhinos and cast smoke screens to lower the evasion, and then you stack that on top of the evasion that you're gaining as your momentum's getting up, all that can work to your advantage. You'll have a pretty decent chance of locking guys into melee, and then you do have access to a lot of flamers, which should allow you to significantly kill a lot of the Necron forces, weakening their effectiveness against you. You just got to be very careful you don't get sniped. And then if you can get the Repentia to be able to snipe the enemy leaders, that'll work out to be a huge advantage for you, especially if you buff them with the Hospiters and you get the increased movement to run them all over the map to really lock guys down again. But it's definitely Necrons are a very good faction because of just their sheer amount of utility with all the different builds, so it can definitely be quite difficult. All right, and then finally we get the situation with the orcs, and the orcs I definitely feel are an uphill battle situation. The reason being is they don't have much for armor, and therefore living lightning builds are going to be extremely effective against the orcs. And you're going to want to keep the orcs somewhat close together because you're going to want to stack the buffs with the pain boys, the big mechs, war bosses, weird boys, all those kind of things. And so it allows the Necrons to really just shoot you apart, because the Necrons are going to be better at killing than you are, and then you're going to tend to overkill the Necron units, and they'll be able to resurrect on top of you. So that's going to work out against you. And then because your heroes don't have much for armor, if they're casting Scarab Swarms on you, it's going to allow them to just completely snipe you, and they're going to likely have more movement. Well, that's not true. They won't have more movement than you, but once they take out your bikes and things like that, the orcs do, unless they do a heavy storm boy build, will have some movement difficulties, and the Necrons can definitely take advantage of that. Now, Necrons typically are pretty slow as well, but the thing they have going for them is a lot of their units have the hover trait, and therefore they can use that to their advantage to capture things. And then if you throw in their Plasmamancer and things like that and dropping nukes in your face, I mean, it just gets to be a big disaster. And the Necrons therefore are very good against fighting the orcs. So it's an uphill battle, if not a try not to bring situation against really experienced players. I would even probably say I'd try not to bring orcs against the Necrons, because it's such a hard battle to do when you have a player that knows what they're doing, because they're going to be able to outshoot you, and you're going to just not be able to keep guys alive enough to be able to keep them going. So hopefully that gives you guys some ideas. I think what I'll do is I'll split this into 2 different videos here, because it looks like I've been talking for quite a while. And next time I will upload a faction versus faction video to include what I would do if I was playing as the orcs, the Tau, and the Chaos Demons. That one may be a little bit shorter, but this one's tending to run a little bit longer. So hopefully this gives you guys some ideas on what to do, and will hopefully limit some of the questions I've been getting, because I've been getting a lot of them on this, and hopefully this is clarifying my thoughts a little bit more. I do think eventually I will make some videos going over different army builds that I really like to give some examples of things. Those of you that have been watching the channel for a long period of time kind of know what I mean when I say a swarm tactics build or a jump boy build, things like that. But I should probably create some videos that specifically have those builds put together to kind of show what I mean by that if people aren't sure, they're newer players. But thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.